person beside you.
Good evening. On behalf of Mr. Steve Bertrand, Director of the Kankakee Public Library, and the officers and members of the Kankakee County branch of the NAACP, we'd like to welcome you to the candidates forum for our county clerk. Our candidates is Mrs. Barbara Wells, Mr. Dan Hendricks. Our timer for the evening will be our branch secretary, Ms. Paulette Crank. Our panelists will be Mr. Jim Simone, representing the Hispanic Partnership, Ms. Alicia Rabideau from the NAACP, and the one and only Mr. Mike Fry from the Kankakee Daily Journal. Earlier, before the session started, there was a coin toss between the two individual candidates, and Mr. Hendricks won. Mrs. Wells will be doing the opening statement, and Mr. Hendricks will be doing the last closing statement for the evening. Housekeeping, bathrooms is to my immediate, your left, my right, and each candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement and a 2-minute closing statement. Each individual will have 1 minute to answer the question that they will receive also from the audience and from our panelists. So with that, again, welcome. Thanks again to our partner, the Kankakee Public Library, and we're going to start with the opening statement, Mrs. Wells.
Good evening. I am very appreciative of the NAACP and for putting this forum on, and I appreciate the community for coming out and participating. My stance and my reason for running for county clerk is because voter apathy has run rampant in our county and in our country. Voters do not feel as if their vote truly matters. And there are things that have been done over the years that have made voters feel impotent when they go to the polls and cast their ballots. And one of the things that I will focus on, should I become county clerk, is voter education. Because I believe that if people understand the power of their vote and the fact that their vote is what actually controls the government, that they would cast them enthusiastically. I think that the county clerk's office should be a place of transparency and information where it should be easy to find what you are looking for, and it should not be put up randomly and in an untimely fashion. I've had many discussions with voters about their knowledge of voting, and one of the things that I have found is people just do not know all of their voting rights. And that will be one of the things that I will work very hard to make certain that Kankakee County is fully served in that manner.
Mr. Hendrickson.
Hendrickson, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to honor my folks, make sure I
Thank
get the
you.
whole name in there. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Dan Hendrickson. I've been a Kankakee County resident for 53 of my 55 years, born in Harvey, Illinois. I've been employed by the county clerk's office for the past 24 years, the last 7 prior to this year as the chief deputy county clerk. By the time that this election rolls around, I'll have overseen 48 elections. We also do more than just elections. We are also responsible for the issuance of vital records. Our records go back to 1853, and it's our job to safeguard those records and to make sure that they are given out in an appropriate fashion. Our office also does do tax extensions, so we are the ones that set the rates for determining your tax bills. Our office does passports. Our office was the first agency in the Midwest to receive a perfect score from the Department of Justice. And that's one of those things that, we'll put a feather in our head on and say we've done a great job. I've been honored over the past 24 years to have served under one of the best county clerks, not only in Illinois, but in the country, Bruce Clark. And his mentorship has been invaluable to me. I've been honored to serve the county the past 24 years. and I would like to continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And our first question is from our panel, Mr. Mike Fry, and the question goes to Mr. Hendrickson.
Thank you for those instructions, first of all. I appreciate it. Mr. Hendrickson, maybe a question for both of you. Early voting has been in place for some time now, and of course you can early vote here at the county clerk's office, but some satellite offices have been set up. By memory, I believe they've been in Bourbonnais and Manteno in the past, might be continuing to be here in the coming weeks. What is your thought about satellite sites for early voting? Are there enough? Should they be expanded to cover more parts of the county?
One of the things, and you're correct, one of the things that we have done is institute satellite locations in Manteno and Bourbonnais. The reason for those two locations is because that's where the voters are. We've done satellite locations in other locations before and had varying degrees of success. That's not to say that in the future we won't look at revisiting other locations possibly, but for this year we will certainly be staying with the Manteno-Bourbonnais locations. And then for future elections, we can look to see if there's demand or need to go to other locations.
Yes, I believe that it should be expanded. And that's why I believe that voter education is important. When someone lives in the eastern part or the western part of the county, that still puts them in a position of having to drive a fair distance to go and cast their early ballot. And someone without transportation, that's their personal transportation, that makes it difficult. Also, I think that if people were educated on voting and you had satellite voting and you advertised that fact and you made it something that was inviting to the citizenry, you would probably have the kind of turnout that you want. But there is something wrong in our system that makes people think that voting, that their vote, their most sacred right as a citizen, is not the most important thing that they need to do.
Thank you. Ms. Rabideau, you're the next panel, and the question goes to Mrs. Wells.
Hello. What is your personal professional background?
Well, I came to Kankakee County, I want to say probably close to 40 years ago. I graduated from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and I came to work for Montgomery Wards, where I met my future mother-in-law. And she introduced me to her son, and eventually we married and had children. I have a degree in liberal arts from Southern Illinois University. I have been a homebuyer educator for the nonprofit here in the city of Kankakee called Neighborhood Partners for 17 years, helping many people buy their first home and helping homeowners maintain their homeownership when they were in crisis. I also am an AFLAC agent. I am a licensed insurance agent. And I do that because I believe that people, again, need education and help with certain situations in their life. So my life has been one of service for the full time that I've been here in Kankakee County.
For me, 24 years of experience serving in the county clerk's office. My educational background, I have an associate's degree in business marketing management and business computer programming, two associate's degrees, both of those from KCC. My asides from that, as far as public involvement go, I was the school board director for St. Paul's Lutheran School several years ago and a school board member, and currently a member of the 100 Club, and I believe that's probably the extent of my experience on that. But the 24 years of experience with the county clerk's office in all facets of the office.
Mr. Simone, and the question is to Mr. Hendrickson.
Good evening. So the county clerk's office website provides information about tax increment finance, TIF districts across the county. Will you continue to provide that information, and what else will you do to expand access to that information?
We certainly will continue to provide that information, and I believe our information goes back as far as the tax information, not just TIF information, but rates go back at least 5 years worth of data. Absolutely, I believe it's a valuable service to provide to the county, and we will continue that. If there's other reports that you believe or any of the public believes that we need to have out there, we can certainly put those out there. But the rate reports, the TIF information, and those other reports, those are the primary reports that are generated from our office through the tax extension process.
Again, yes, the reports are published, but how is the public educated on that information? How are they made to understand what it means? And that is one thing that I would work very hard to do, to make sure that people understand these things. Because when you say tax increment financing, does the average citizen know what that means? They probably don't. And they don't understand that that is tax money that was paid into the county, but it's held away from paying the county's bills, and it's used to improve business districts. But then when you look in our community and you see the improvements or lack thereof, you have to wonder what really is going on here. And that's why I would educate people as to what those tax increment financing districts are, how much money is held in them, and what the expenditures that come out of them are for.
Okay, thank you. From the first round of the question from my panel, I've heard voter education. Mr. Fry asked regarding the satellite. So with Mrs. Wells, can you talk about how will you improve voter education and getting the information out from the county clerk? Mr. Hendrickson, you would ask the same question. And the second part would be, how can you mention where the voters are in the Manteno northern region, and I think there was one other area, Manteno and Bourbonnais. I'm well aware that about a year or so ago, there was some concerns from the Pembroke Township area. So can we talk about how can we expand the satellite, and that would be the two questions, voter education and how can we improve our satellite sites throughout the county? Mrs. Wells.
Well, you have to, of course, look and see what you can do based on the budget that you have. But just like back in the day when I was a child, there was something called a bookmobile. We could have something simple like a voting mobile, and you could go to Pembroke Township, and you could go to Otto, and you could go to these communities, and you could set it up for a day. You could flyer in the churches, you could flyer in community centers, and you could let them know that you are coming and that early voting will be available in their communities at a certain day, at a certain time. We rely too heavily upon candidates to inform citizens about elections. And that makes people who do not believe in the party that that candidate is running under suspect of what that candidate is saying. Also, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mr. Hendrickson.
One of the things that we do to improve voter education is that we do send out mailings to all of the households to inform the voters of when early voting periods are and where their locations are. We'll also be doing some radio advertisements to include that, to let them know about more information about early voting. As far as the earlier question about location of satellite locations, like I said, for this election, we're fixed. We have to be fixed by state statute so many days before the election. But for future elections, we can look into the possibility of doing some satellite locations in other locations throughout the county. It is a resource management issue, so we want to make sure that we're delivering the best bang for our buck for your tax dollars.
Thank you. Mr. Fry, you have the question to Mr. Hendrickson.
There seems to be a scarcity of election judges. Indeed, the clerk's office recently put out a call for judges, both Democrat and Republican, to try to get more for the November 6th election. In recent years, your office has used high school seniors in this rule. What are your thoughts about it? Specifically, do you believe it helps get young people more involved in the democratic process?
That is a great question. Our office was one of the first to implement using high school students as election judges once legislation passed. We have adopted that and embraced that. Recently, a few years ago, our office did a program where we talked about our first voter program, and it's a three-pronged approach. Having high school students serve as election judges, our outreach with Olivet, and, also having other students serve as election judges. That program that we submitted won an international award. We beat out Pakistan and Palestine for the award for first-time voters. It was showing that voters or students who take part in these programs are more likely to be active voters in the future. So we're rather proud of that. We embrace that. We are greatly appreciative of our high school students.
Okay. Well, I am on the school board, and gee, that's news to me. We haven't, you may have that program, but I don't believe that it is advertised as something that students can do, that it is part of the curriculum, that it is where they can see it, hear it, feel it, touch it. I've never heard of our kids participating in it from the Kankakee School District.
You should contact the principal.
Anyway, now I don't interrupt you when you're
I
talking,
apologize.
sir. Thank you. So I'd like some seconds back. Thank you. Again, I still press on voter education because when I am out in the community, the things that people do not know, such as people who have been recently released from prison, they do not know that they can register to vote. And I've talked to people, and it was very interesting, the fact that as a candidate, they didn't want to talk to me. But when I spoke to them about the fact that they were now eligible voters because they have served their time, they became very interested in what I had to say. And while the county clerk's office is claiming awards worldwide, we have citizens right here who still don't see it, hear it, feel it, or touch it.
Thank you, Mrs. Wells. Ms. Rabideau, and you have the next question and questions to Mrs. Wells.
Okay. Ms. Wells, what do you feel are the most important duties of the county clerk?
Of course, I feel that the most important duty is voting, simply because setting up elections and running and setting up precincts is one of the most important jobs and the way that citizens access their voting rights. And we have been experiencing packing and cracking in our precincts and in our county board districts where portions of citizens are moved in and out of precincts and in and out of districts to make sure that a district falls in a certain direction. And this entity, the county clerk's office, has been controlled by one party for such a very long time. It's very hard to see that it is done in a nonpartisan way and not done in a way that keeps things going in a certain direction.
Mr. Hendrickson.
The important aspects of the county clerk's office, all of them, to be perfectly honest. While voting is probably the most visible function, and some would argue the most important, there's other functions of that as well. The setting of your tax rates, that's critical. Issuing marriage licenses, being the safeguard for your your vital records. Those are all very important functions, and none of them are taken lightly. You know, when people talk about what's a typical day at the county clerk's office, we don't have typical days. We have people who are coming in who are trying to get death certificates for a loved one who's passed. We have people who are excited because they're getting married for the very first time. We've got that enthusiasm. We've got people who are so proud because they're casting a ballot and they've just registered to vote. So we embrace and all of the emotions of the office. That's part of the functions of our office.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrickson. Just to the audience, I see there are members throughout the audience that are picking up questions. Please be mindful that any question that is being written have to be a question that can be answered by both candidates. So that have to be mindful, have to be answered by both individuals, okay? Mr. Simone, you have the next question, and it's to Mr. Hendrickson.
Okay. So there's been some controversies in the clerk's office the last couple of years. And I'm just wondering how you would address those and how you would help alleviate some of the public concerns about some of those controversial issues.
Is there a specific controversy that you're
Well,
referring to?
I know that some people have mentioned the senior tax extension as an issue, but there might have been some others as well.
The senior tax extension wouldn't be one of those functions that falls under the purview of the county clerk's office. That would be the assessor's office.
Okay. Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Well, while the county clerk probably doesn't want to talk about possible controversies, there have been some issues going on right here with this election. We had a candidate come in behind some people who came to register to vote, and they were not informed by the people who work at the county clerk's office that they could register to vote and cast their ballot on the same day. And they were leaving the building when someone who was a committeeman for the Democrats was walking in and heard them discussing the fact that they couldn't cast their ballot today, that they had to wait for a voter registration card to be mailed to them. And he took them back to the counter, and the clerk said to them, "Oh, I didn't know you wanted to vote today." It's not your job to know what the customer wants. It's your job to ask the customer how you can help them and inform them of what you can do for them.
Mr. Fry, you have the question, and the question is to Mrs. Wells. Or you can also...
Yeah, a number of audience questions have hit, so why wouldn't this seems like something Ms. Wells would be eager to answer. How would you increase voter turnout in this county? What specific ideas do you have about that?
Well, one of the things that we need to do is probably do things in the community for WISE is educating voters. Go to the farmers market, set up a table, have time for people to register and ask questions of county clerk staff members, and not just wait for them to contact our office. Be out in the public. Go to service meetings and talk to those folks at the meeting about the functions of the county clerk, but especially about voting. You cannot expect, when people have been, and I hate to use the word deprived, but that's the word that comes to mind, and then expect them to come to where you are to ask you for the thing that they feel they've been deprived of. If you really want people to access something, you need to create excitement around it. In the past, I've driven past the county clerk's office during early voting. There's no sign outside on the sidewalk that says that early voting is even going on. There's no evidence of it except for a card in the mail if you have an address.
Thank you. Mr. Hendrickson, and you have an additional 10 seconds.
I'll be frugal.
Thank you.
One of your question was what can the county clerk's office do to increase voter turnout? You know, I think the best avenue for increasing voter turnout is the people around us. You know, I don't know that as a politician that if I tell you why it's important to vote, that you're necessarily going to listen to me. But you're going to listen to your mom. You're going to listen to your dad. You're going to listen to your neighbors. These are the people who are going to be telling you about the things that are important to them and have shared values. We certainly will do everything that's within our power to continue to educate the office or the public in what's available for voting. But really, it's the public. It's you that are the most effective communicators of the importance of voting.
Thank you, Ms. Rabideau. And the questions to Mr. Hendrickson.
Hello. This is a question from the wonderful audience. If you would change anything in the clerk's office, what would that be?
It's a great question.
Before you answer that, Mr. Hendrickson, I think the question should be, can you read it again?
It says if you would change anything in the clerk office, what would that be?
Okay, so go ahead, and I was just going to add them because Mrs. Wells is the opponent, and she's not there, so it'll be an ad, but you can go ahead and add that.
Would or
Mr.
could change.
Thank you.
Okay. You know, the one thing that I look at that we definitely need to do better on is our outreach with the Hispanic community. It's a growing population in Kankakee County, and honestly, I'm not sure that we're serving them to the best of our ability, but it will be something that will be addressed in the future, provided that if I'm reelected, it will become a goal of mine to increase the participation amongst the Hispanic community, the education of the Hispanic community, those outreach programs.
Mrs. Wells.
Well, I'll just focus on one thing, and it's been my single string banjo, voter education. Getting out in the community, going where the people are, and talking to them, talking to you, being invited to your community gatherings, and coming in with the information that they need. In order to outreach to the Hispanic community, you have to have people that speak their language in your office, working with you. So that's one way to address that. But again, when citizens feel as if they don't matter, that their vote doesn't matter, that they're going to be pushed into precincts, that their precinct is going to be moved randomly. I was talking to a friend this morning. She's been in her house over 20 years. I helped her buy her first home when I worked for Neighborhood Partners. And she's had over 6 different voting places over the last 20 years. I've had 6 different voting places myself, and I've been in my house for 32 years.
Thank you. Well, we had the word controversy, and throughout America, our last election brought up a number of concerns across America regarding the last presidential election. Question is to Mrs. Wells. When elected, what will you do as it relates to voter fraud and that we won't be hacked as it relates to individuals going in and voting? And Mr. Hendrickson, the question would be, what have you been doing as it relates to voter fraud? Okay,
so the first thing that needs to take place is an evaluation of the systems, of the computer systems, of the security of that system. What are they using to secure it? And it's actually pretty scary, the fact that secretaries of state, multiple, in 21 states in the United States, have had their data breached. And now 17 security agencies for the United States say that it was the Russians and Russian intelligence that did that, and that we are still currently under attack. What I advise people privately to do is to use a paper ballot. because paper cannot be hacked. Electronics can be hacked. So it would have to be evaluated. Someone would have to come in with these skills to look at it and make sure that we are doing all that we can to secure our electronics and our data.
Mr. Hendrickson.
I would like to let everybody know here that the elections in Kankakee County are secure. The programs that we use, the computer program that we use to generate the ballots, isn't even on the internet. It's in a locked room. It's in my room, and the room is alarmed. So the program that creates the ballots doesn't touch the internet ever. The cards that we generate for both our optical scan and our touchscreen devices are generated off of that computer. The fail-safe with those machines is if there is any tampering with those memory cards in any way, shape, or form, those cards won't upload. So our elections are secure, have been secure. You know, we send that information out to the judges the night before the election. They safeguard those memory cards the day before, and those aren't out in the polling places until the day of the election. So I feel 100% confident in the security of the elections in Kankakee County.
Mr. Fry, questions to Mr. Hendrickson?
Mr. Hendrickson, you mentioned that no 2 days are the same in the county clerk's office. So what is the days like you personally? Is it a 40-hour-plus week job? Is it demanding? You putting in a lot of time there? And by Ms. Wells, what kind of schedule would you plan on working should you win office?
In my days, I'm usually one of the first 2 or 3 people at the building, and I'm usually one of the 2 or 3 people that leave the building. In the 2 weeks before the election, 12-hour days are not uncommon. The weekend before the election, we'll be open both days. Election day starts at 4 o'clock in the morning and doesn't end until midnight. 40-hour week it sounds good. It sounds like a promise, but it doesn't very well happen.
Well, the person who can testify to my work ethic is here, my husband, Floyd, who constantly reminds me that I have to pace myself. So working more than 40 hours would not be something that I would be disturbed by. Getting up early, starting early, finishing late is not a problem for me. And making sure it's done right is something that I do until I get it right.
Ms. Rabideau, questions to Mrs. Wells.
Hello. I'm curious if you can talk about your personal attributes that will aid in your service to the community.
Well, my personal attribute is the ability to communicate with people, the ability to find out information from them about what they need so that we can adjust what we do to address those needs. What I have found when I've gone into the county clerk's office is that customer service is not top of mind for some of the people who work there. I had a personal experience there when I went in for some information, and the young lady was sitting at her desk, and she spoke to me from across the room. She didn't rise up and come to the counter and speak to me so that I could hear her and have a conversation with her. And I had to say to her several times, I can't hear you, because I do have a hearing problem. And she kept raising her voice and talking louder from where she was sitting. And I said, I can't hear you. And she still did it again. And finally, she got up and came to the counter to address me.
Mr. Hendrickson.
Ms. Wells, if you had a bad experience at our office, I would like to apologize for that. That is not what our expectations are, nor should it be. In response to your question, what attributes do I have? I probably would say that the greatest one would be empathy. You have to be able to put yourself in another person's shoes, regardless of the situation that they're having. we sometimes get people who are a little bit angry or upset for whichever reason. You can't get in the position where you argue with that person. You have to be able to understand why they're feeling that way and try to find, and sometimes the answer may be that I can't help you, but always the answer for our office is, if we can't help you, here's what you can do to find help. So being able to put yourself in that other person's shoes is critical for our office.
Mr. Simone, and the question is to Mr. Hendrickson.
Is social media used to spread any of the information from the county clerk's office, and what other tools or resources are being implemented or could be implemented in the future?
We certainly do have, and I would have thought everybody would have liked our Facebook page by now. We do use Facebook for implementing our social media, for getting out our press releases, to letting people know information about early voting, election information, tax information, all other aspects of our office. We're pretty regular on our Facebook account. We have a Twitter account, but I will confess that we're not strong on our Twitter account. But social media seems to be one of the more prominent ways for people to get their information now, and I'm proud to say that we do use that, and I believe that we use it fairly well.
You want me to talk about social media? Sure. Okay, well.
Either something that could be improved or be added, or what other social medias could be used to get information out, or other tools and resources for younger people.
I think that using social media is critical, but you have to get the right people following you. You have to go out and ask people to like your page. So that's all I can say about that. As for the county clerk's post, I use social media frequently, and they don't come through my news feed, so I don't see their post.
Mr. Fry, you have a question from the audience and a question to Mrs. Wells.
Yes, I do, Theodis. I see advertisements on TV that people are going to leave Illinois because the real estate taxes are too high. What do you say to these people?
Is that my question?
Yes.
Well, I think that what people don't realize when they go to other communities is where we're paying for it with real estate taxes. Other communities are paying for it with fees and other types of charges that they experience. My daughter lived in Virginia, and you had to buy a license plate sticker, and you had a car tax that you had to pay every year. That was just a bill in the mail. You didn't get a sticker to put on your car or anything like that. You just had a car tax that you had to pay. And she had a very old car and a very, what I thought, exorbitant car tax. I think it was like $70 a year or something like that I paid for her car out there. So while you may escape property taxes, and I think that property tax owners are unfairly burdened, we need to look other places for solving our tax problems. There are people who are escaping their tax burden, and they have way more money than you or I.
Mr. Hendrickson.
You know, the question about property taxes is one of those that, well, you know, if I had control over, you know, what the property taxes would be, I could see where we could do some things different. I don't have that power. You know, I will tell you that, you know, for our budget, we are very fiscally minded and very fiscally responsible. Our budget between the county clerk and elections for next year is going to be roughly $564,000. That's probably about $70,000, $80,000 less than it is this year. That's okay. We'll be able to make that work because next year, the odd year elections, our expenses, we can be mindful of our expenses on that. But to tell people, you know, the only thing that I would tell the people is that, you know, here's the tax dollars that you've entrusted me with. I promise you that I will be fiscally responsible, that I will be mindful of every dollar that I spend, because it's not just my money, it's your money too.
Mr. Hendrickson, how important is it for county officials to work together in a positive and professional manner?
I think that being able to work together with a united goal is very important. I'm very proud of my relationship with all of the county-wide officials and also the county board members. I believe that we have a great team together, and I believe that the county is going in a good direction. We finally made some significant improvements, and I would like to say that I would take credit for it, but I know that that's not entirely on me. That's a lot of the good work from the county board members and the other department heads as well.
So with that, how do the county clerk work with the other county officers, including the county board?
Well, certainly for the tax cycle process, the assessor and the treasurer and I work well together because that's the three major components of the tax cycle. As the county clerk, I'm also clerk of the board, so I work with the county board members on several issues.
Okay. Mrs. Wells, both questions, and it'll be the second one about the responsibility of the county clerk, and how does the clerk work with other county officers, including the county board?
Well, while I don't occupy the office and I don't have all of the knowledge that Dan has, I know about working together with people from different backgrounds to accomplish a task. I've been president of Kankakee School District Board of Education twice, serving a total of 4 years in that role, and I've been on that board for a total of 13 years, going into my 14th year. We have balanced our budget by working together, by looking at the things that we are going to spend our money on. And I expect that those functions of working together and finding out what my role is and doing that role to the best of my ability would be no different than what I'm doing as a board member for Kankakee School District 111.
Mr. Abadou, you should have another question from the audience there. Question is to Mrs. Wells.
If you win, will you hire your opponent as your chief deputy or in some other role in the office?
Of course, those decisions will have to be made at that time. You can't let knowledge just walk out the door, though. So that's how I feel about that. There is institutional memory that goes with a person when they leave. So you can't afford to take over an office and then totally destroy the institutional memory at the same time.
Mr. Hendrickson.
If Mrs. Wells wins, I'd like her to hire me.
Good answer.
Mr. Simone, you have the question. It's to Mr. Hendrickson.
How would you expand or address diversity in the staff of the clerk's office? And on top of that also, how would you help to increase sensitivity to LGBT issues in the clerk's office among the staff?
According to, as far as diversity in the office, through Data USA, Kankakee County is 75% Caucasian. I'm sorry, 72% Caucasian, 15% African American, and 9.8% Hispanic. Our office is 75% Caucasian, 12.5% African American, and 12.5% Hispanic. So I believe that we are fairly representative of the county as a whole in our office. As far as sensitivity to LGBT issues, you know, one of the things that came up in our office was when several years ago with the same-sex marriages, when that became an issue. We were encouraged to adopt, you know, same-sex marriage licenses earlier than we could have. And while we would have loved to have done that, the concern that we had was that if we issued that marriage license early before state law allowed, does that cause problems for those couples getting married prior, afterward? So, yes, we are aware of those issues, and we do our best to maintain sensitivity.
Mrs. Wells?
One of the things that I have noticed about Kankakee County is that there is a high level of tolerance here. I have not seen or experienced the kind of discrimination that we have seen go on in other places in our country. And I'm very proud of that fact. And I'm glad to be able to say that I've never had someone complain to me about being mistreated because of their sexual orientation or their race at the county clerk's office. And I would maintain that standard and do my best to improve upon it.
Thank you. Mr. Fry, and you have the question is to Mrs. Wells.
Mr. Wells, both of you have a party distinction, but your office is one where non-partiality is important in terms of the election process. How can you ensure, as county clerk, that all people would get the fair shake? And in your case, the Republicans wouldn't say, well, it went this way because she's a Democrat. How can you handle that situation?
I find it interesting that you asked me that question, especially after the Republicans have held this office for as long as my daughter is old. She's 32 this year, and the Republicans have held this office, and they have moved precincts and moved board district lines and moved voters where they could choose their candidate into places where the candidate is basically choosing their voters. So I will approach this as a totally nonpartisan way. And with my emphasis being, and my campaign platform being voter education, that education applies across the board. And the more people who participate in a democracy, the stronger that democracy is. Right now, certain people in this community do not feel fully enfranchised because the way their polling places are being moved and their precincts and their board districts are being adjusted.
Mr. Hendrickson.
First off, as far as county board districts go, our office doesn't have anything to do with the drawing of those lines. As far as my relationship with the members of the other party, if you look back on my voter history, you would see that for 12 years I was a registered Democrat. And I believe that I've worked well with members of both parties, and I don't think that there's anybody that could say that I've treated a member of the Democratic Party differently than I would treat a member of the Republican Party. I have no reason to differentiate on that. I like to sleep. So my conscience would bother me if I were to do something like that. What you believe as far as your partisan values, that's one issue. But when you come into our office, you get the same level of service that anyone else would get.
Ms. Rabideau, you have the question. Questions to Mr. Hendrickson.
What plans do you have to address your top 3 priorities?
My priority, I had the phenomenal experience of working under Bruce Clark. And under Bruce Clark, customer service was job 1 and priority 1. And while, I don't want to say that, we don't have, specific plans for here's what we're going to do, maintaining the integrity of the office, maintaining the customer service that you all demand and expect, that's priority 1, 2, and 3 for me.
Mrs. Wells.
Well, I'll speak to this question from my perspective. Customer service is job 1 when you have a job where you are supposed to serve the public. So I would expect for that to improve. I would expect for people to try and meet the needs of the citizens that come into the county clerk's office. And when people come in with difficult problems, not like trying to pick up a birth certificate for a family member who has lost their ID and is no longer in the community and needs that information to be sent to them so that they can replace their IDs. I expect my staff to know what they can do and to figure out how to help this person instead of having them to run around back and forth trying to figure out how to solve this problem. If a problem is brought to us, we need to figure out how to solve it, especially if it falls in our purview.
Thank you. I'd like to, again, thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend our County Clerk's Forum. I want to thank Mr. Steve Bertrand and the staff of the Public Library, and we are near the closing statement. We're going to start with Mrs. Wells, and since we are on track of time, we're going to give each candidate 3 minutes in closing statement. Ms. Wells and Mr. Hendricks, starting with Mrs. Wells.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate you listening so attentively. Our public library is one of the crown jewels of the city of Kankakee. So I thank the staff of the public library and the NAACP for hosting this forum. I hope that you will vote for me because sometimes change is needed. When an office or a department is run by one party or one particular entity for years on end with no interruption, you can't be certain that the public's interests are being served because nobody has taken a look at what's going on and what can be done to make things better. Things tend to be in a rut. When I became a member of Kankakee School District 111's Board of Education, I was a change agent. And the people who had been there for long periods of time were very unhappy with me because I had questions about why they were doing things the way they were doing them. And the answer that I always got was, that's the way we've always done it, which is not a satisfactory answer when the needs of the citizens are not being met. So I would like to be the change agent for the county clerk's office. I would be a change agent who would work hard to bring voters back to the polls. It is a shame in America where we talk about being the leader of the free world that we have election turnouts under 50%. How are we the leader of the free world when our citizens don't feel compelled to authorize the government to act in a certain manner? They feel like what they do in the polling booth doesn't make a difference because the government is going in a certain direction and it's not the one that they want to see it go in. We need to educate our citizens about what our government does, what our Congress does, what our state legislature does, what our state senators do. People don't understand these things. They hear them and then they don't hear them. And if the county clerk is the holder of the record, he can tell you many things about what is actually going on, like with property taxes. Where is there a trend when people are being foreclosed on and banks from out of town are taking properties, foreclosing on them, and then not paying the property taxes and leaving that tax burden on the citizen? So there's a lot that I will do
Mrs. Wells.
as county clerk.
Mrs. Wells,
and one of them is to make a great change.
Mr. Hendrickson.
I'll be brief. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I also want to thank the NAACP and the Kankakee Public Library for hosting this event. It's good to see you all out tonight. I feel kind of like I'm a little bit in church with everybody in the back row, sir. But you know, I've had the honor and the privilege to serve in the county clerk's office the past 24 years. And I love my job. And, you know, it's one of those things that I didn't think that when I first started there that I would love it as much as I do, but I do. And I appreciate it. You know, I appreciate everybody that came out here. We've got work to do in Kankakee County, but I think that together we're turning the corner and heading in the right direction. I would like to maintain that as your county clerk. You know, the integrity of the office is critical. In 2 weeks from the election, they're going to be starting to file for the City of Kankakee election. So we're going to have a municipal election, a municipal primary coming up at the end of February that we need to get ready for. People are going to be filing in our office right before Christmas time for school board elections, for the April elections. It's really a critical time in this election cycle to maintain the integrity, the experience, and the professionalism that you expect and that you demand. And with that, I would be humbled to ask for your vote, and I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everybody.
We want to thank Mrs. Barbara Wells and Mr. Dan Hendricks. We want to thank WKN and Mr. Ron Jackson, our timer, Ms. Paulette Crank, our panel, Mr. Jim Simone, Ms. Alicia Rabideau, and Mr. Mike Fry. Again, thank you for coming out. Thank you.